What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. People who were actually killed for being witches. Most people have heard of the Salem witch trials and know that in many cultures people have been sentenced to death for heresy. But what you might not know is that this is a practice that has been committed throughout human history, and across the globe it is even still practiced in some cultures today. But who were these witches? Why were they killed? Although the responses to these questions may be a little morbid, it is impossible to deny that they are truly fascinating. If you've looked into witch trials before, you might have learned that the majority of these cases were pure hogwash. Mass hysteria, political motives, and plain old hatred have all been used as reasons for an individual to be executed as a witch. However, there have been a few instances in which people who were killed as witches actually confessed to their crimes with pride, and a few of them even committed acts that were so horrible that people assumed they were supernatural. So, keep in mind that a few of these stories are a little graphic, and climb aboard your boomstick as we look at the various souls who were killed for their witchy tendencies. Hysteria. People accusing each other of witchcraft is hardly a new concept. Around the year 415 CE, there was a young woman by the name of Hysteria living in Alexandria, Egypt, who people thought was a bit unusual in the sense that she wasn't readily embracing the Christian religion, and instead spent her time studying the pants off of the other mathematicians of her day. In fact, she is still known as the first female mathematician in the world, which, unfortunately, upset a lot of people. Peter the Lector in particular wanted to make sure that she and her pagan, math-loving ways were stopped immediately. The most effective approach: kill her and tell everyone she's a witch. Unfortunately, Hypatia's end wasn't exactly quick. At a nearby church, a mob dragged her from her carriage and stripped her naked. They then beat her with roofing tiles until she was dead or near enough. Then, for good measure, they tore her into pieces and burned what remained. To put it succinctly, they had a sincere desire to ensure the eradication of this alleged witch. Agnes Waterhouse. The first woman to be executed for witchcraft in England was Agnes Waterhouse, also called Mother Waterhouse. She was known for having a cat that answered to the name Satan, for possibly killing men, and for being labeled a witch when she was as young as 12. She claims that the cat instructed her to kill any children or individuals she saw in a sinister voice. It demanded to be fed blood and milk, and had supposedly tormented her sister with these demands as well. Waterhouse also claimed to have had relations with demons who threatened to harm her if she did not do their bidding. She was found guilty and given the death penalty. She initially acted unfazed and stood tall and proud. However, she eventually began to plead for her life, stating that she trusted and believed in God. It was not enough, and she was executed in 1566. Garnier Gillis. Some people accused of witchcraft really were terribly nasty people. Gillis Garnier is a good illustration. He was a hermit living in France up until 1573 and committed terrible acts for which he was accused of being not just a witch but a werewolf. When Garnier got married, his new wife was unhappy about the lack of variety in the food that surrounded her husband's isolated lifestyle. To make up for this, Garnier began killing, butchering, and eating children. He also fed his new wife the meat from these children to satisfy her desire for variety. He did this with at least 4 children. When he was caught and put on trial, he claimed that he had come across a specter in the woods that gave him the ability to change into a wolf and do magic in order to hunt more easily. Witnesses said they saw him eating children's raw flesh in the fields, and some even said they saw him as a wolf. He was found guilty of witchcraft and lycanthropy, for which he was burned at the stake in 1573. From then on, he was known as the Werewolf of Dole. Stedelen. It's easy to put the blame for a village's poor harvest on witchcraft. Sadly, Stedelen died as a result of this. He lived in Switzerland in the late 1300s and happened to meet a formidable foe one day. Peter von Greyers, a judge during that time, firmly believed that the occult was alive and well in Switzerland. He claimed that miscarriages, crop failures, marital disputes, storms, and more could all be linked to dark magic. Greyers specifically said that Stedelen had put a lizard under a doorway and sacrificed a black rooster on the Sabbath. Usual witchcraft-wise stuff. The thing is that Stedelen actually admitted it, after being tortured, of course. He admitted that he'd made a pact with demons and was promptly burned at the stake. Grayers continued his search for other members of satanic cults after his death, and persecuted individuals for years. Women were tortured, men were killed, and it all began with this one incident. Angeli de la Barthe. The Inquisition had its fair share of grisly executions and cases of torture, including those of witchcraft. In 1275, a French woman named Angeli de la Barthe was accused by the supreme chief of the Toulouse Inquisition of having relations with the devil and giving birth to a monster that ate babies. A tall order, perhaps, but she didn't really claim to be innocent. During the course of her trial, she admitted that she had been feeding the monster babies for 2 years and even boasted about having slept with the devil. She was burned alive for her deeds. This incident is widely credited as being the first killing in a string of medieval witch persecutions, and there were many more that followed. The account is now thought to be fictitious by some, but witchcraft-related executions were common at the time. Thomas Doughty. This name, or at least the name of his associate, may be familiar to you. Thomas Doughty was a soldier, an explorer, and a nobleman who died in the middle of the 1500s. He sailed with famed captain Sir Francis Drake, who was also a slaver and politician, and who also ended up being his accuser. The two men started off as friends, but in the summer of 1578, Drake became separated from the rest of his fleet during a storm and slowly convinced himself that it was because Doughty was practicing witchcraft. The two argued, but Drake eventually snapped and had Doughty tied to the mast, accusing him of being a witch. There was a brief trial once they landed, and although Drake later seemed to regret his decision, it was far too late. Drake's decision to sentence Doughty to death by beheading after he was found guilty of witchcraft would haunt him for the rest of his life. Leatherlips. Native Americans have their own version of witches, who are frequently regarded with the same hostility. Leatherlips, a Wyandot Indian in the 1800s in Ohio, is perhaps best known for having signed the Treaty of Greenville and for encouraging peace and cohabitation with European settlers. However, many other chiefs did not like this, and some began to work together against him. Roundhead directed his execution for witchcraft in 1810. Settlers who were living with him at the time pleaded for his life, but to no avail. He went back with the other tribal leaders without a fight. Once there, he prayed, ate, and drank with his people. He then dressed up in his very best clothing, gave a ceremonial death chant, and was promptly taken out by a tomahawk blow. There is now a statue in his memory in Dublin, Ohio. Rebecca Lemp. Salem isn't the only place to have had a witch hunt. In the late 1590s, Nordlingen, Germany, was hit with a swath of witch accusations and executions. There were 32 women found guilty of witchcraft, one of whom was Rebecca Lemp. Rebecca was the mother of 6 children, but that didn't stop local lawyers and burgomasters from arresting and torturing her. She was tortured on at least 5 different occasions and eventually she confessed to witchcraft. Sadly, the situation did not end there. In order to make her appear more guilty, Rebecca was forced to write a letter to her husband, who was away on business, and children in which she admitted to being a witch. He couldn't do anything, even though her husband didn't believe it. She was tortured a bit longer and then burned at the stake. Many other women followed her down this path of torture and death. Cleary, Bridget in 1895, a man in Ballavadlia, Ireland, was tried and eventually convicted for killing his wife. This may sound dark, but not terribly unusual, except that Michael Cleary claimed to have done it because his wife was actually a witch or changeling. You see, Bridget Cleary had gone missing, and when investigators eventually questioned her husband, he claimed that his wife had been taken by fairies and replaced by some sort of magical, evil creature. When he realized this, Michael did the only logical thing there was to do: burn his wife to death. It's still not clear if he burned her body before or after her death, but it's pretty clear that he was the one who killed her. The trial was a long and arduous one, and Michael was imprisoned for 15 years for his crime. An Irish nursery rhyme still has the following line to this day: "Are you a witch, or are you a fairy? Or are you the wife of Michael Cleary?" Bridget Bishop. The Salem witch trials of 1692 are unavoidably the first thing that come to mind when considering individuals who were murdered for being witches. 20 people were executed for being witches, the first of whom was Bridget Bishop, out of approximately 72 people who were accused. Other women noticed that she was a rather flamboyant woman for her time. Eventually, women accused Bishop of being a witch, claiming that her shape would haunt or threaten people, and during the trial they screamed and flailed, claiming she was hurting them even then. In addition, men came forward, asserting that she had afflicted them with pain and even poisoned them after disagreements. Her previous, now deceased husbands were even brought up. This was enough to seal her fate, and despite the fact that she claimed to be innocent, Bishop was sentenced to death and was hanged. Bonanno, Giovanna. When people think of witches, one thing that comes to mind is their enigmatic tinctures, and Giovanna Bonanno pretty much lived up to that stereotype. When she was tried for witchcraft in Palermo, Sicily, at the end of the 1700s, she was begging. She confessed during the trial to being a professional poisoner and had been selling poisons to women who wanted to murder their husbands. She claimed that initially the poison would cause pain, then put them in the hospital, and eventually kill them. The doctors of the time could not figure out the cause of death, and it is unknown how many people she poisoned during this time. Many women testified against her, as did the local apothecaries who sold her potions. She was supposedly very good at creating various ointments and magical potions to help with minor and major ailments. However, her poisoning habit was where she found her end. She was executed by hanging on July 30, 1789. To this day, she is known as Old Vinegar. Crucko christens the accusation of witchcraft did not escape even the nobility. In 1621, Christens Crucko was a noble lady living in Scandinavia, and her life was pretty good. Unfortunately, her sister Anne was not so lucky, and had given birth to 17 children, all stillborn, and could not seem to conceive a healthy baby. People began to attribute this misfortune to witchcraft after a while. One woman was even put to death after being accused of this. At first, none of these people were nobles, but eventually Christian IV, the King of Denmark, pushed people to accuse Christens Crucko of the act. Crucko confessed to being jealous of her sister's marriage when she was arrested. She was found guilty of sorcery and was decapitated with a sword. However, rather than being buried as a witch, she was given the burial of a noble, Murray bin Ali bin Isa al-Asiri. Some may think that killing people for witchcraft is a thing of the past, but that's not entirely the case. Murray bin Ali bin Isa al-Asiri of the Najran province in Saudi Arabia was a bit of an adulterer and had committed this act with 2 women. When he was finally investigated, he was found to have books in his possession as well as various talismans. He was given the death penalty when accusations of witchcraft were added to his list of wrongdoings. Human rights groups protested and he was executed. Shockingly, this happened in 2012. Yes, this means that in some parts of the world, people are still being accused and killed for supposedly witchy behavior. People who were actually killed for being witches. A dark history of persecution and superstition. The fear of witchcraft dates back to the beginning of human civilization. Across cultures and centuries, individuals, mostly women, have been accused of consorting with dark forces, casting malevolent spells, and causing misfortune through supernatural means. While many of these accusations were rooted in mass hysteria, political vendettas, or personal grudges, some of those executed as witches either proudly confessed to their alleged crimes or committed acts so horrifying that people believed they had to be supernatural. From ancient scholars to modern-day victims, the persecution of supposed witches has taken many brutal forms, often ending in torture, public execution, and posthumous infamy. 1. Alexandrian Hypatia, c. 350 to 415 CE. The philosopher torn apart by a Christian mob. Hypatia, one of the most brilliant mathematicians and philosophers of her time, met a gruesome end in 415 CE. As a pagan scholar in Christian-dominated Alexandria, she became a target of religious fanatics. Accused of witchcraft and heresy, she was dragged from her chariot by a mob led by Peter the Lector, stripped naked, and flayed alive with broken pottery, ostraca. Burning her body erased not only her life but also a significant amount of her work. Her death marked the decline of classical learning in Alexandria, and remains a chilling example of how intellectual women were demonized. 2. The first witch to be put to death in England, Agnes Waterhouse, 1534–1566. Agnes, also known as Mother Waterhouse, was the first woman in England to be hanged for practicing witchcraft. Her trial centered around her alleged familiar, a demonic cat named Satan, which she claimed spoke to her in a strange language and demanded blood sacrifices. She admitted that she killed livestock, people, and even her own husband with a cat. Though she initially faced her execution bravely, she eventually begged for mercy, professing faith in God, but it was too late. Her execution in 1566 established a precedent for subsequent witch trials in England. 3. Gilles Garnier d. 1573. The Werewolf of Dole. In addition to being accused of witchcraft, French hermit Gilles Garnier was also accused of possessing lycanthropy, or the ability to transform into a wolf. After his wife complained of their meager diet, Garnier began hunting children, butchering and eating their flesh. Witnesses claimed they saw him eating corpses in the fields in the form of a wolf. At his trial, he confessed that a forest spirit granted him the power to transform. In 1573, he was killed by fire, solidifying his reputation as one of history's most infamous werewolves. 4. Stedelin, 14th century. The Swiss peasant who confessed under torture. During the late 1300s in Switzerland, a man named Stedelin was accused of witchcraft after a series of crop failures and miscarriages plagued his village. Under torture, he admitted to sacrificing a black rooster to the devil and placing a cursed lizard under a neighbor's door. Although forced, his confession fueled widespread hysteria and led to additional witch hunts. He was burned at the stake, setting off a wave of persecutions in the region. 5. The late Angélie de la Barthe, 1275. The first recorded witch burned by the Inquisition. Angélie de la Barthe, a French noblewoman, was accused of bearing a demon's child, a monstrous infant that allegedly fed on babies. Under interrogation, she confessed to sleeping with the devil and raising the creature for 2 years before it was discovered. Her case is frequently cited as the first official witch execution by the Inquisition, even though some historians question its authenticity. She was burned alive in Toulouse. 6. The explorer Thomas Doughty, 1545–1578, was executed at sea for witchcraft. Thomas Doughty, a nobleman and close friend of Sir Francis Drake, was accused of witchcraft during their circumnavigation voyage. After a violent storm separated their ships, Drake became convinced Doughty was using dark magic to sabotage the expedition. Following a sham trial, Doughty was beheaded on a remote island. Drake later regretted the execution, but the incident shows how easily superstition could override reason, even among educated men. 7. Leatherlips c. The Wyandot chief was executed for sorcery between 1732 and 1810. A respected Wyandot leader, Leatherlips advocated peace with American settlers, a stance that angered tribal rivals. Accused of witchcraft by Chief Roundhead, he was condemned to death. After a ceremonial meal and prayer, he was killed with a tomahawk blow. His execution highlights how indigenous cultures also persecuted alleged witches, often for political reasons. 8. The late Rebecca Lemp, 1590. The German mother tortured into confession. Rebecca Lemp, a mother of 6, was arrested during the Nordlingen witch trials after neighbors said she cursed their livestock. After days of torture, she confessed, and was forced to write a letter admitting her guilt to her husband. Despite his protests, she was burned at the stake in 1590, one of 32 women executed in the panic. 9. Bridget Cleary, 1867–1895. The Irish woman burned as a fairy changeling. Michael Cleary, Bridget's husband, became convinced that she had been replaced by a fairy impostor during one of the last witch trials in Europe. After weeks of exorcisms, he doused her in oil and burned her alive. He insisted that he was protecting his real wife from the fairies during the trial. He served only 15 years in prison. 10. Bridget Bishop, 1632–1692. Salem's first hanged witch. A bold, outspoken woman in Puritan Salem, Bridget Bishop was an easy target. Accused of tormenting neighbors in spectral form, she was condemned after girls convulsed in court, claiming her spirit attacked them. On June 10, 1692, she became the first of 20 executed in the Salem trials. 11. Giovanna Bonanno d. 1789. Sicily's old vinegar poisoner. A beggar turned professional poisoner, Bonanno sold deadly potions to Sicilian women wanting to murder their husbands. When caught, she boasted of her skill, claiming doctors couldn't detect her toxins. Hanged in 1789, she remains a folkloric figure in Italy. 12. Christens Krukko d. 1621. The noblewoman beheaded for cursing a royal womb. A Danish aristocrat, Krukko was accused of cursing her sister's pregnancies, 17 stillbirths. She confessed and was beheaded under King Christian IV's pressure, but she was given a noble burial rather than being burned like common witches. 13. Murray bin Ali al-Asiri d. 2012. The Saudi man beheaded for witchcraft. Al-Asiri was put to death in 2012 after he was discovered with magic books and talismans, proving that witch hunts are not just a thing of the past. Dozens of people have been executed in recent decades as a result of Saudi Arabia's anti-witchcraft laws. Conclusion. A legacy of violence and fear. The witch hunts reveal humanity's darkest impulses, scapegoating, misogyny, and the fear of the unknown, from Hypatia's lynching to contemporary executions. While most victims were innocent, a few, like Gilles Garnier, were genuine monsters. Yet their stories all serve as warnings. When fear overrides reason, the results are always deadly. Asterisk word count. 1/500. For a full 5,000-word version, each case could be expanded with trial transcripts, historical context, and deeper analysis of societal fears driving witch hunts.